My name is Michelle Vance and I'm 27. 2 years ago, I was broke, sleeping on a friend's couch. Today, I own a charter fleet worth $12 million because I found a loophole in a dead man's contract nobody saw. Last summer, my rival tried to take it all. He froze my assets, sent lawyers, and threatened to destroy me. He thought I'd fold. He didn't know I'd already signed the one paper that would make him regret stepping onto my dock. Before I take you to the day I stood on that dock and watched a billionaire's face turn white, I need to ask you, if you've ever been underestimated, if someone ever told you you're not smart enough, not rich enough, not connected enough, drop a lightning bolt in the comments. Because this whole story is about what happens when they're wrong, and if you want to see how one overlooked clause in a dusty contract can overthrow an empire, hit subscribe. Now let me take you back to March of 2020. To a marina in Fort Lauderdale, and the last day I accepted that my life was just going to be small. I grew up around boats, but not the kind you're picturing. My dad repaired outboard motors in a shed behind our double wide in Stuart, Florida. I could change a fuel filter before I could drive. By 23, I was a deckhand at the Blue Water Marina in Fort Lauderdale, scrubbing teak, polishing chrome, invisible to the owners who stepped off their 60-foot sportfishers in deck shoes that cost more than my monthly rent. I was a pair of hands, that was the deal. I knew the rule, people like me service the yachts, people like them own them. I accepted it. The day that changed was a Tuesday in March, the kind of gray, sticky afternoon that makes the marina smell like diesel and dead fish. I was hosing down the stern of a Hatteras when I overheard two marina managers arguing inside the dockmaster's office. The name that kept coming up was Obsidian. Obsidian was the ghost of our marina, an 85-foot Sunseeker, black hull, 3 staterooms, a flybridge you could land a helicopter on. It had been tied to the end of B-Dock for 4 years, untouched, unpaid, slowly rotting into the waterline. The owner, a Venezuelan businessman named Ricardo Delgado, had died of a heart attack in 2016 while the boat was undergoing a refit. The estate had been a mess. 2 ex-wives, a daughter no one could locate, a holding company registered in Panama that didn't answer mail. So the yacht sat, marina fees accumulated, nobody claimed it, nobody sold it, nobody touched it. That afternoon, I heard one manager say to the other, the auction's been scheduled, Carrington's already sniffing around, he'll pick it up for nothing. Derek Carrington was the undisputed king of South Florida's charter fleet scene. He owned 14 boats, a private marina in Palm Beach, and a reputation for swallowing smaller operators whole. I'd seen his white hair and tan face in the glossy yachting magazines the owners left on board. He was not the kind of man who lost. He didn't bid against people, he made sure there was nobody left to bid. The managers left, and I stood there with a dripping hose, staring at Obsidian's black silhouette against the gray sky. Something about that yacht had just put a hook in me. I couldn't explain it, I still can't. That night, I went home to my friend's couch and opened my laptop. I'm not a lawyer, my highest education is an associate's degree in marine mechanics. But I know how to read a contract, and I'd spent enough time around marina paperwork to understand the basic legal machinery of how boats get bought, sold, and seized. I started pulling every public document I could find on Obsidian: dockage agreements, lien notices, probate filings. It took 2 weeks of late-night reading, but eventually I found it, a single paragraph buried in the original marina berthing contract that Delgado had signed 12 years earlier. Standard right of first refusal clause. If the owner died or defaulted, the marina was legally required to notify the estate and offer them the opportunity to purchase the vessel before any third party could claim it. The notification had never been sent. I checked the probate file twice. Not a single certified letter. Not one email. The marina, the very marina where I was still scrubbing decks, had deliberately buried the clause and moved straight to a forced sale. They were about to break their own contract in a way that would render the auction legally void, and nobody knew it except me. I sat in the dark of that apartment, heart beating in my throat, and I realized I was holding something that could either get me fired or make me rich. I called my friend Anna, a paralegal I knew from high school. "You're telling me you found a loophole in a dead guy's boat contract," she said, "and you want to do what with it?" I didn't have an answer yet. All I had was an idea that felt too big for a deckhand with $46 in checking. I needed money, real money, not to buy the yacht, but to hire a lawyer significant enough to freeze the auction and challenge the marina's claim. I needed investors. I started with my uncle Tommy. He owns a small marine supply store in Jupiter, not rich but comfortable, and he'd always believed in me more than anyone else in my family. He listened to my pitch in his back office, surrounded by boxes of zinc anodes. "You're 25 years old," he said. "You want to fight a marina, a dead man's estate, and Derek Carrington? What happens when they crush you?" "Then I go back to hosing down decks," I said. "But what happens if they don't?" He wrote me a check for $50,000. It was every cent of his retirement savings he'd never told my aunt about. He slid it across his desk without breaking eye contact. 2 other investors followed, a retired boat surveyor who'd spent decades watching the big players rig the game, and a silent partner Anna found through her firm who agreed to fund the legal retainers in exchange for a cut of whatever equity we could claim. I had $200,000 in 3 weeks, enough to hire a maritime attorney with sharp teeth. Now I needed a claim. The missing notification was one thing, but I needed standing. If the estate had been denied their right of first refusal, the only person who could legally challenge the sale was the heir. So I hired a private investigator to find Ricardo Delgado's daughter. Her name was Isabella, 29 years old, living in a 1-bedroom apartment in Tampa, working as a dental hygienist. She had no idea Obsidian existed. Her father had been a distant figure, a voice on the phone twice a year before he vanished into his business dealings. When we finally spoke over coffee at a diner near the interstate, I told her the whole mess, the yacht, the marina's failure, the auction, and what we could do about it. Isabella looked down at her coffee for a long time, then she looked up at me. "I don't want the boat," she said, "but I don't want them to steal it either. What do you need me to do?" I needed her to sign a document granting me power of attorney to challenge the sale on behalf of the estate in exchange for 10% of any future charter profits. She signed on the spot. No lawyers, no haggling, just a ballpoint pen on a diner napkin we later formalized. The marina had no idea what was coming, neither did Derek Carrington. The auction was scheduled for November 15th. My lawyer filed an emergency motion to halt the sale and notified the marina of their contractual breach. The motion cited chapter and verse of the original berthing agreement, the probate gap, the missing notification, everything. The marina's legal team scrambled. They offered a settlement, walk away, sign an NDA, get a $50,000 payout. I refused. They threatened to countersue for tortious interference. I didn't blink. The morning of the auction, the marina's attorney called mine with one word: postponed. They were terrified of a courtroom where their own contract would be read aloud. That was the opening. 2 months later, a court-ordered auction was held, not the marina's rigged version, but a legitimate one overseen by a neutral third party. I showed up at the courthouse in a blazer I'd bought at Goodwill, with Isabella at my side and my Uncle Tommy in the back row. Derek Carrington was there. His tailored Italian suit filled the doorway. He glanced at us the way you glance at a dead bug on a windshield. The bidding started. Carrington's opening bid was $400,000, well over what he'd expected to pay at the original fire sale. I countered with what I had, $340,000, every dollar I'd scraped together from my investors. Carrington's eyes narrowed. He went to $450, I was out, then something shifted. The judge had included a provision in the auction order. The buyer had to cover all outstanding marina fees and penalties, nearly $200,000 in back dockage. Carrington's legal team hadn't accounted for that. The delay pushed him past his internal cap. He dropped out. The gavel fell. I had just bought an 85-foot yacht for less than a third of its restored value. I stood in the courthouse hallway shaking when Carrington walked up to me. He smiled that polished crocodile smile. "Enjoy your little victory," he said. "I'll see you in court." He filed the injunction 3 days later. The suit claimed I had falsified the original contract, that the right of first refusal clause had been forged, that Isabella's signature was invalid, that the entire auction was a fraud. He froze my assets and seized the yacht in the middle of its refit. I was left standing on the dock, staring at the empty slip where Obsidian used to be, with a lawsuit worth more than I'd make in 10 lifetimes. And the only thing that could save me was a piece of paper I hadn't found yet. I watched them tow Obsidian out of the marina on a gray morning in February, Carrington's lawyers standing on the dock like they'd just won a war. They'd frozen my business account, seized the yacht mid-refit, and slapped me with a lawsuit demanding $2.3 million in damages for fraud, tortious interference, and intentional infliction of a billionaire's bruised ego. My attorney, a woman named Gloria Reyes with 30 years of maritime litigation and a resting face that could stop a Coast Guard cutter, told me the truth over coffee. "Carrington's not trying to win," she said. "He's trying to bury you in legal fees until you can't breathe. Then you settle, he gets the yacht, and your name becomes a joke at every marina from here to Monaco." I had no income, no collateral, and a $200,000 retainer that was burning at $40,000 a month. Every week, another motion landed on Gloria's desk. A request for discovery that demanded every text I'd ever sent, a deposition subpoena for my Uncle Tommy, a formal complaint to the Florida Marine Licensing Board that I'd been operating without proper certification. That last one was false, but fighting it required lawyers I couldn't afford, and the board didn't close cases quickly. I watched my investors' confidence fray. Uncle Tommy never said a word, but I heard it in his pauses on the phone. The retired surveyor stopped returning my calls. The silent partner's attorney sent a letter asking for an exit clause. My phone rang less and less, and when it did, it was usually a journalist from a trade rag asking if I was about to declare bankruptcy. I stopped going to the marina. I'd walk past the slip where Obsidian used to be, the wooden finger pier now empty, a single dead seagull floating in the scum line, and something inside my chest would pull tight. It wasn't just the money. That yacht had become something more than a boat. It was proof that I could be more than a deckhand, more than invisible, more than everyone had ever told me I'd be. Now it was gone, and the man who took it was sipping champagne on his own private dock while I couldn't afford a full tank of gas. I need to pause here for a moment. If you've ever had the thing you worked for taken from you by someone who just had more power, drop the word fight in the comments. And if you think there's no way a 25-year-old deckhand can beat a multi-million-dollar empire, type "watch me." Because that's exactly what my enemies were thinking, and I was about to prove them wrong in a way no one saw coming. It started with Isabella. While the legal machinery chewed through my life, she'd been quietly driving to Tampa Public Archives, pulling every document she could find on her father's estate. She sent me an email with a PDF attachment, a scanned ship's log from Obsidian's last documented voyage. I opened it at 3 in the morning, exhausted, blurry-eyed, not expecting anything. Then I saw it. An entry dated October 11th, 2015, written in the captain's hand. Delgado met with Marina manager Fontaine. Signed Addendum Ray, Clause 17, document placed in master cabin safe. I read it 6 times. The word addendum was a landmine buried in a sentence I'd almost scrolled past. Clause 17 was the right of first refusal clause. I knew it by heart. The marina had claimed there was no such addendum, no document that altered the original contract, no proof that the marina had ever acknowledged the notification requirement. In every filing, their lawyers had stated that the original berthing agreement was the sole controlling document and that the estate had no standing to challenge the sale. But if this log was real, the marina manager had signed something on board Obsidian and that something might still be on the yacht. I called Gloria at 7 a.m. sharp. We need a motion to inspect the vessel, now. Gloria is not a woman who gets excited, but her voice pitched up half a tone. If that addendum exists and we can find it, Michelle, this case flips. Carrington's entire injunction is built on the claim that you fabricated the right of first refusal. A signed addendum from the marina itself torches that argument. The problem? The yacht was locked in a private storage facility owned by Carrington's holding company, guarded 24/7 under court order pending litigation. Getting access required a judge's signature. And Carrington's legal team would fight it tooth, claw, and legal delay, the very weapon that had been bleeding me dry for months. But here's where something strange happened. 2 days later, I got a voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. The voice was male, older, with the rasp of a lifelong smoker. Miss Vance, my name is Lionel. I was the maintenance supervisor at Bluewater Marina for 18 years. I was there the day Delgado signed that addendum. I watched them slide it into the safe myself. I also watched Fontaine destroy the marina's copy a year later when he realized the estate might come asking. I've got a bad conscience and a terminal diagnosis. Call me. I called back within 60 seconds. Lionel agreed to provide a sworn affidavit. He described the addendum, a single typed page signed by both Delgado and the marina manager, formally acknowledging that the right of first refusal applied to any forced sale and that the estate was to receive written notice within 30 days of any trigger event. He gave me the date, the names of 2 other crew members who'd witnessed the signing, and a description of the master cabin safe, a false bottom drawer beneath the main safe, custom installed by the original owner back in 1996 when the boat was first commissioned. Delgado was secretive, Lionel said. He kept everything in duplicates. The safe had that hidden compartment. If they didn't find it during the refit, the addendum's still there. Armed with Lionel's affidavit, Gloria filed an emergency motion for a targeted inspection of the vessel, citing newly discovered evidence and the risk of spoliation, the legal term for evidence being destroyed. And this time, the judge didn't side with Carrington's delay tactics. The motion laid out the specific location, the witness testimony, and the enormous legal implications. The following Monday, the court ordered a joint inspection. Carrington's attorneys, a team of forensic document examiners, a court-appointed notary, and 2 armed security guards would be present. And so would I. The morning of the inspection, the sky over Fort Lauderdale was clear, sun glinting off the warehouse's corrugated metal roof. I wore the same blazer I'd bought for the auction, steamed and pressed by my uncle's wife, and tried to keep my hands steady. Carrington was there, leaning against a black Escalade, arms crossed, his sunglasses hiding whatever was behind his eyes. He didn't speak to me, but I felt his attention like a weight on my shoulders. They opened the storage bay, and Obsidian sat there on a custom-built cradle, half its interior stripped, the refit frozen mid-phase. I climbed the ladder with Gloria behind me, stepping onto the aft deck for the first time since they'd torn it from my slip. The master cabin smelled of sawdust, old leather, and a faint trace of diesel. The safe was a steel plate set into the forward bulkhead behind a teak panel that had been removed during the refit. The door was unlocked. Inside, documents, old registration papers, a faded photo of Delgado with his daughter, a stack of Panamanian bills long since expired. Nothing. Carrington's lead attorney exhaled loudly. Satisfied, Ms. Reyes? Gloria looked at me. I looked at the bottom of the safe, a smooth metal floor, no visible seams. My heart dropped. Then I remembered Lionel's words. False bottom drawer, custom installed. I knelt down and pressed on the front edge of the floor panel. Nothing. I pressed harder, then slid my fingers along the left seam. A soft click. The entire floor panel released and tilted upward on a hinge, revealing a compartment beneath. You could have heard a pin drop in that cabin. I reached in and pulled out a single document, sealed in a zippered, waterproof bag. The notary leaned in. I opened the bag, slid out the paper. It was exactly what Lionel had described. A typed addendum dated October 11, 2015. The language was unmistakable. The marina acknowledged the right of first refusal, agreed to formal notice, and indemnified the estate against any failure to comply. At the bottom, 2 signatures, Ricardo Delgado in black ink, and beneath it, the signature of the marina manager, font in the man who'd sworn under oath in Carrington's initial filings that no such addendum existed. The notary authenticated the document on the spot. The forensic examiner photographed every millimeter. Carrington's attorney went pale beneath his tan. Outside, someone cursed. I stood up, holding the paper in my hand, and looked out the narrow porthole. Down on the warehouse floor, Carrington had removed his sunglasses. He was staring directly at the cabin window, and for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I saw something in his expression that I'd never seen on a rich man's face before. Genuine, undisguised fear. He knew that paper didn't just win my case. It exposed his entire case as a weapon built on a lie. But fear makes powerful people more dangerous, not less. And I was about to learn that Carrington had one more move on the board, a move I never saw coming. The addendum was supposed to end the war. Within 2 weeks of that inspection, the judge vacated the asset freeze. Carrington's fraud claims collapsed and the court ordered Obsidian returned to my possession. I remember standing on the dock as the transport crew winched her back into the slip. She looked rough, interior gutted, hull streaked with warehouse grime, but she was mine again. Uncle Tommy was there and Isabella and Gloria. Somebody opened a bottle of cheap champagne. I told myself the nightmare was over. I was wrong. Derek Carrington didn't accept defeat. He understood something I was still too young and too naive to learn. Losing a courtroom battle doesn't mean losing a war of attrition. And his next attack would come not from the legal direction I was watching, but from a past I didn't even know existed. It started with an envelope that arrived at my uncle's marine supply store on a Friday morning. No return address. Inside, a single photograph of Obsidian's hull taken during the original 1996 DEA seizure and a handwritten note. That boat still belongs to my family. You're sitting on stolen property, walk away or we take everything. Uncle Tommy called me, voice tight. He'd been in the marine business long enough to know that when people start mentioning seized assets and cartels, they aren't writing fan mail. I took the threat seriously, but thought it was just Carrington playing dirty, trying to rattle us through intimidation. Then the actual legal filing landed. Carrington's new strategy was elegant in its viciousness. He'd retained a Miami attorney who specialized in international asset recovery, and together they dug into Obsidian's ownership history all the way back to 1996. The yacht had originally been seized by the DEA during Operation Cornerstone, a joint task force bust that netted 11 vessels and 3.7 tons of cocaine from a Cali cartel shipping front. The seizure was clean, the auction was public, and the title had transferred through 4 successive owners, including Ricardo Delgado. But Carrington found a crack. In 1998, a man named Hector Ospina, the former financial lieutenant of the cartel boss who'd originally commissioned Obsidian, had filed a claim in federal court arguing that the yacht was purchased with legitimate funds, not drug proceeds, and therefore the seizure violated due process. The claim had been dismissed. Ospina appealed. The appeal was dismissed, but the paperwork had never been formally closed on one ancillary motion, a procedural loose end that sat dormant in the Southern District of Florida for 27 years. It was legally meaningless, but it looked terrifying on paper. Carrington's new suit argued that because the forfeiture might be technically incomplete, the entire chain of title was void and the yacht should be returned to Ospina's estate. He'd even located a surviving nephew in Medellin willing to assert a claim. Carrington offered to settle the claim on my behalf. I would sign over Obsidian to his company, and he would handle the cartel. If I refused, he'd push the nephew's claim all the way to trial and paint me in every newspaper as the girl who got rich off drug money. The story broke on a Tuesday. I woke up to a Sun Sentinel headline, boat at center of court battle tied to Colombian drug cartel. The article didn't mention the addendum, didn't mention the fraud Carrington had already been caught committing, didn't mention that the title cloud was a 27-year-old clerical error. It just ran the photo of the 1996 seizure, the DEA agents in windbreakers, the cocaine bales on the dock, and my name underneath. By noon, my silent partner's attorney had sent a formal withdrawal letter. The retired surveyor's wife called to say her husband wanted nothing more to do with me. Uncle Tommy stood firm, but I could hear the fear in his voice. The Marina board sent a letter demanding I remove Obsidian from the slip immediately, citing reputational risk. Even Gloria, stone-faced Gloria, looked at me across her desk and said, "Michelle, this is bad. We can beat the title claim in court, but court takes 2 years and $2 million. How long can you hold your breath?" That night I sat on the aft deck of Obsidian alone, the marina lights reflecting off the black water. For the first time since this all began, I considered quitting. Not the dramatic kind of quitting where you throw something and scream, but the quiet kind where you run the numbers honestly and realize that fighting a billionaire with infinite resources and a dead cartel ghost is not bravery, it's just math. I was 25 years old. I had $50,000 left of my uncle's money and a yacht I couldn't sell, couldn't charter, and couldn't even keep in a slip. I put my head in my hands and let the silence answer for me, and then my phone rang. It was Lionel. The old maintenance supervisor's voice was even raspier than before, and he was speaking fast, the way people do when they're afraid someone's listening. "Miss Vance, there's something I didn't tell you, something about that hidden compartment." I straightened up. "What do you mean?" He hesitated. "The false bottom drawer wasn't Delgado's idea. It was original to the boat, installed in 1995 by the first owner, the cartel guy. Delgado found it when he bought the boat, but he never told anyone. He kept his own papers in there, but when I was at the warehouse that day before your inspection, Carrington's people got there first." My stomach dropped. "They searched the boat before the court-ordered inspection. They had a private team go through it 2 days earlier. I wasn't supposed to know. One of the security guards is my nephew. He said they found something in that drawer and removed it before you ever stepped on board." I felt the world tilt. "What did they find?" Lionel's voice dropped to a whisper. A second envelope, older, sealed with a notary stamp from 1998. My nephew saw it. He said the document inside looked like an affidavit signed by Ospina himself, the cartel's lawyer, swearing that the boat was bought with clean money and that the DEA seizure was illegal. It was the missing piece of that old court case that never got closed, and Carrington has it. I hung up and stared at the dark water. The addendum we'd found was real, but Carrington hadn't cared about that anymore. He'd found something older, something more dangerous. And if he could prove that Ospina's affidavit was authentic, authenticated by the very compartment I'd opened in front of a notary, then the title cloud became a hurricane. I wouldn't just lose the yacht, I could lose everything. And Carrington would own Obsidian, free and clear, with a terrifying story to tell at every yacht club dinner, how he alone had wrestled a cartel asset back from a fraudulent deckhand. I needed to know if the affidavit was real. I needed to know if Carrington had just fired a live round or a blank. And the only person who could tell me that was someone I never expected to meet. But that's not even the worst part. I need to pause again. If you've ever been blindsided by something from your past that you had nothing to do with, drop a ghost emoji in the comments. And if you think Carrington has finally won, type not yet. Because what happened next changed not just the legal case, but everything I thought I knew about the boat I'd been fighting for. 3 days later, Isabella called. She'd been running her own parallel investigation into her father's records, and she'd found something Carrington didn't know existed. Ricardo Delgado had been meticulous, almost paranoid, about documenting every transaction. When he bought Obsidian at the DEA auction in 2001, he'd hired a title attorney to scrub the entire chain of ownership. That attorney had produced a binder 2 inches thick, every lien release, every court order, every dismissal. And buried in that binder, Isabella found a document stamped by the Southern District of Florida on March 14, 2001, a final order permanently dismissing Hector Ospina's claim with prejudice. The judge had ruled that Ospina's affidavit was hearsay, that the DEA seizure was fully lawful, and that no further challenges could be filed. The case was dead. It had been dead for 2 decades. Carrington's new evidence was either a duplicate of the same rejected affidavit or a forgery designed to look like a smoking gun while hiding the fact that a judge had already thrown it out. Isabella sent me the scanned order. I forwarded it to Gloria, who read it at 2 in the morning and called me immediately. "Michelle, this changes everything. Carrington either didn't know about the dismissal or he did and he's suppressing it. Either way, he just filed a lawsuit based on a claim that was judicially dead before you were born. That's sanctionable. That's malicious prosecution. That's the kind of mistake that ends careers." But we still had a problem. Carrington had the affidavit and he had a media narrative. The public didn't read court orders, they read headlines. And the headlines said my boat was a cartel ghost. If I wanted to clear my name and save my business, I couldn't just win quietly in court. I had to make the truth louder than his lie. And that meant forcing a confrontation on the biggest stage I could find. The decision came to me the next morning, standing in the empty slip where Obsidian used to sit. I wasn't just going to prove Carrington wrong, I was going to make him admit it, publicly, in front of the same cameras he'd used to smear me, and I knew exactly how to do it. Carrington had one weakness he'd never been able to hide: his ego. He loved an audience. He loved winning in public. So I'd give him an audience, and I'd let him think he was winning right up until I pulled the rug out from under him in front of everyone who mattered. I made one phone call to the Fort Lauderdale International Boat Show Committee. The biggest marine industry event in the country was happening in 10 days. I requested a primetime speaking slot. The topic: title integrity and the future of charter ownership. They accepted. Carrington was already on the schedule as the keynote. They had no idea they'd just booked a duel. The morning of the boat show, Fort Lauderdale glittered. Every marina was packed with super yachts, every hotel lobby buzzing with brokers and owners and journalists. Carrington gave his speech first. I sat in the back, unrecognized, watching him in a navy blazer, white hair perfectly slicked, telling the crowd about the importance of protecting our industry from title fraud and bad actors. He didn't mention my name, but he didn't have to. The implication was clear. Then it was my turn. I walked to the podium in the same blazer I'd worn to the auction. The room quieted. Carrington was seated at a front table 10 feet away, his lawyer beside him. I set a single document on the lectern, the court order from March 14, 2001, and I began to speak. What happened in the next 15 minutes would either restore everything I'd built or destroy me completely. And sitting there in the second row, arms crossed, smile frozen on his face, Derek Carrington still believed he had the winning hand. He had no idea I was about to show the entire room exactly what he'd tried to hide. I walked to the podium and the room fell silent. 200 people in that ballroom, brokers and owners and journalists, the entire marine industry squeezed into one room under crystal chandeliers. I could see Carrington at the front table, 10 feet away, his hands folded, that smug half-smile still locked in place. His lawyer leaned over and whispered something. I adjusted the microphone, took a breath, and began. "My name is Michelle Vance. 2 years ago, I was a deckhand scrubbing teak at Blue Water Marina. Today, I own an 85-foot yacht called Obsidian. You may have read about it in the paper." A murmur rippled through the room. I kept my voice steady. "You read that my boat was tied to a Colombian drug cartel, that I acquired it through fraud, that one of the most respected men in this industry, Derek Carrington, is heroically trying to reclaim it for its rightful owners." I paused and looked directly at him. Every single one of those claims is false, and I have the receipts. I lifted the first document. This is the original Marina contract for Obsidian. It contains a right of first refusal clause that Blue Water Marina deliberately ignored. I found that clause. I used it to challenge a rigged auction. When I won, Mr. Carrington sued me and froze my assets. He claimed I fabricated the clause. I lifted the second document, still sealed in its protective sleeve. This is the addendum I found hidden on the yacht during a court-ordered inspection. It proves the clause was real. It was signed by the marina manager himself. Carrington's own lawyers watched me pull it out of a false bottom drawer. I let the room absorb that. His fraud case collapsed, so what did he do next? I lifted the third document, the newspaper clipping. He went to the press and told a different lie. He dredged up a 27-year-old forfeiture case from the DEA, a case that was dismissed in 1998, dismissed again on appeal, and permanently closed with prejudice in 2001. I held up the final order, the one Isabella had found, and I read the case number aloud. This court order ends the Ospina claim forever, no further challenges, no outstanding motions. It's dead, and Derek Carrington knew it was dead when he filed his new lawsuit. I set the document down and faced him directly. Mr. Carrington, you built your entire case on an affidavit that a federal judge threw out 23 years ago. You either didn't do your homework or you did, and you hid evidence from the court. Which is it? The room went absolutely still. Carrington's smile had vanished. His lawyer had gone gray. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Carrington stood, buttoned his blazer, and walked toward the exit. He didn't answer. He couldn't. A journalist near the back yelled, "Mr. Carrington, do you have a response to Ms. Vance's accusation?" He kept walking. The door swung shut behind him, and the room erupted into noise. Within hours, the video of that confrontation was on every yachting blog and marine trade site. Carrington's reputation cracked wide open. Within 2 weeks, his own investors began pulling out, asking questions about how many other boats in his fleet had clouded titles and hidden skeletons. The dominoes didn't stop falling. But I wasn't finished. Gloria filed a motion for sanctions, and the judge granted it. Carrington's firm was ordered to pay our legal fees plus a penalty for filing a frivolous lawsuit. Then we countersued for malicious prosecution. That case settled out of court for an undisclosed sum, but I can tell you it was enough to finish Obsidian's refit, pay back every investor in full, and still have operating capital left over. Uncle Tommy got his $50,000 back, plus a bonus that covered the aunt he'd never told about it. Isabella got her 10%, which she used to go back to school to study maritime law. She told me she wanted to help people like her father, people tangled in the messes left by powerful men. Lionel got a quiet thank you, a private nurse for his final months, and a promise I'd never speak his name publicly until after he was gone. He passed 6 weeks after the boat show. I still have his voice message saved on my phone. Obsidian was relaunched on a Saturday in May. Full restoration, polished teak, new engines, a flybridge that gleamed in the sun. I stood at the helm as we motored out of Fort Lauderdale for the first time, past the marina where I used to scrub decks, past the empty slip where I'd sat alone and nearly quit. My crew was small but loyal, a captain I'd hired away from Carrington's own fleet, a junior deckhand who reminded me of myself at 23, and a chef who made magic in a galley kitchen. The charter bookings started slow, then suddenly they didn't. The story of how I'd beaten Carrington had made Obsidian famous. Clients wanted to charter the yacht with the legend attached, $10,000 a day, then 12, then 15. By the end of the first season, we were generating $35,000 a week. I paid off the marina's back fees, the same ones that had once nearly sunk me, and quietly acquired 2 more distressed vessels. One had been abandoned by an owner who'd fled a divorce. The other had engine failure and a bank ready to scrap it. I bought them both at a fraction of their value, fixed them up, and added them to the fleet. Now here's the thing about winning. It doesn't erase the nights you spent awake, terrified, staring at a ceiling that felt like it was closing in. It doesn't unbetray the people who walked away when the headlines got ugly. The retired surveyor who dropped me at the first sign of trouble, I never heard from him again. The silent partner who demanded an exit clause, he came back 6 months later with a polite request to reinvest. I didn't answer his email. Some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt, others you reinforce with steel. Uncle Tommy still runs his supply store, and every time I visit, he pours me a cup of terrible office coffee and says, "I told you so." He earned the right to say that forever. Isabella and I stayed close. She interned with Gloria's firm and eventually became a maritime attorney in her own right. A few months ago, she called me with a piece of information that made my blood run cold and then laugh. She'd been researching the final item from the hidden compartment, the envelope Carrington's team had removed before the inspection, the original Ospina affidavit that he'd tried to use as his smoking gun. She discovered that it wasn't from 1998. It had been fabricated in 2022, on paper artificially aged, with a notary stamp purchased online. Carrington's people had planted it on the yacht, expecting it to be found and used as a trap, but they'd planted it before I ever boarded. When I revealed the addendum instead, they couldn't unplant their forgery without admitting they'd accessed the boat illegally. The document that was supposed to destroy me became the final nail in their case. The federal prosecutor's office is now investigating. I'm not naming names, but I'm watching. I'm standing on the bridge of Obsidian as the sun sets over the Intracoastal. My fleet is 3 boats now, soon it'll be 4. I have a crew of 14 people who depend on me. I pay them fairly, I remember their names, I don't treat them like furniture, and I don't forget what it felt like to be invisible. This yacht, this business, this entire improbable life, it wasn't handed to me, I took it. I took it by reading more carefully, digging deeper, and refusing to accept that the rules only protect the people who wrote them. Derek Carrington taught me that the powerful will use every tool they have: money, lawyers, newspapers, even dead cartel ghosts. But he also taught me that every empire has a crack if you look long enough. In that hidden compartment, after the investigations were done, I had it sealed permanently. But before I did, I placed one more document inside, a copy of the court order from 2001 with a note taped to the front. It says, "Truth is patient. It waited 23 years for someone to find it. If you're reading this, keep digging. Someday, some other deckhand, maybe a girl with a hose in her hand and a question in her head, will find it. And she'll know that the game isn't over. It's just waiting for someone who refuses to play by the old rules." That's the story of Obsidian. But I want to tell you one more thing, something I learned when the cameras were off and the headlines faded. And it starts with the day I almost gave up standing on an empty dock, trying to decide if walking away was the bravest thing or just the easiest. I'll continue the script with Act 2 Part B, which covers the aftermath of the inspection, Carrington's final countermove, the deep escalation, and the transition into the payoff. This section will intensify the stakes, reveal the full scope of Carrington's scheme, and set up the final confrontation. The addendum should have ended it. The moment that document surfaced, Carrington's fraud case didn't just weaken, it collapsed. Gloria filed an emergency motion to dismiss, and the judge vacated the asset freeze within 72 hours. Obsidian was released back to my custody, still half-gutted from the interrupted refit, but legally mine. I remember standing on the dock, watching the transport crew guide her back into the slip. The black hull caught the morning sun. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt like a target. Carrington didn't attend the hearing where his case imploded. He sent a junior associate to read a 2-sentence statement about respecting the court's decision. I knew it was theater. A man who'd spent 40 years building a maritime empire doesn't walk away from a public humiliation. He recalculates, and I was about to learn that his next weapon wouldn't be filed in any courthouse. 2 weeks later, my phone rang at 6 a.m. Uncle Tommy. His marine supply store had been burglarized overnight. Not cash, not inventory, just one filing cabinet, the one where he kept our original partnership agreement and the canceled check for his $50,000 investment. The thief knew exactly what to take. 2 days later, my silent partner called. He'd received an anonymous package containing photocopies of a 1996 DEA seizure record, with my name handwritten across the top in a single sentence: "You're in bed with dirty money." He pulled his funding the next morning. Then the retired surveyor, the third investor, got a letter from a lawyer representing concerned citizens implying he'd lose his professional license if he stayed involved. He was gone by Friday. One by one, Carrington dismantled my support structure without ever signing his name. He understood that to destroy me, he didn't need to win in court. He just needed to make sure I was fighting alone. But here's what Carrington didn't know. While he was peeling away my allies, Isabella had been digging into a completely different corner of her father's past. She'd flown to Panama on her own dime without telling me and spent 2 weeks in the offices of the holding company that had managed her father's assets. What she found was a fireproof safe containing a leather-bound ledger. The entries were in Spanish, logged between 1998 and 2001, and they detailed every meeting, every payment, every handshake Ricardo Delgado had made while buying Obsidian from the DEA auction. Isabella translated the relevant pages over a video call. Her voice cracked as she read. One entry, dated March 2001, described a meeting between Delgado and a young attorney representing a rival bidder. That attorney had offered Delgado a bribe to drop his bid. Delgado refused. The attorney's name, printed in her father's handwriting, was Derek Carrington. I sat in my kitchen and stared at the screen. Carrington hadn't just been a competitor at my auction, he'd been circling Obsidian for 20 years. The yacht wasn't just an asset to him, it was an obsession, a prize he'd been denied when he was still a junior lawyer trying to build his name. The ledger entry explained everything: the aggressive legal tactics, the relentless grinding war, the refusal to accept any outcome that didn't end with him owning that boat. I wasn't fighting a businessman. I was fighting a man who'd been nursing a 20-year grudge against a dead man, and I'd inherited the grudge along with the title. Isabella sent me the scanned ledger page. Gloria added it to the growing file of evidence, and then Carrington made his final move. He filed an emergency injunction in federal court, not state court this time, citing the original 1996 criminal forfeiture case. His argument was audacious. Because the Ospina claim had never been formally closed on one ancillary motion, the entire chain of title from the DEA seizure to my ownership was legally void. He'd found a retired federal clerk who submitted an affidavit stating the case file contained an unresolved procedural question. That clerk, I later discovered, was Carrington's wife's uncle. The injunction was granted on a Friday afternoon before Gloria could file a response. Obsidian was seized again. This time they didn't just tow it, they impounded it at a federal marshal's facility, a concrete warehouse with razor wire and armed guards. I couldn't even visit the slip to look at empty water. There was no slip, there was nothing. I need to pause again. If you've ever felt like the system is designed to protect the people who already have power, drop an anchor in the comments. And if you think this is where I gave up, type wrong. Because what happened next changed not just the legal case, but everything I understood about the boat I'd been fighting for. Night I called Lionel, the old maintenance supervisor answered on the first ring as if he'd been waiting. They took her, I said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I know I heard, but there's something I never told you about that false bottom drawer. I leaned forward. What? It wasn't Delgado who installed it, Lionel said. The compartment was original, built in 1995 by the first owner, the cartel boss. Delgado found it when he bought the boat, but he never told anyone. He just used it for his own papers, but before he died, he told me there was something else down there, something from before. He said if the boat ever got taken, I should tell the person who came looking. I didn't understand what he meant until now. My pulse quickened. What was it? I don't know, Lionel said. I never looked, I was too scared, but he said it was in a sealed envelope older than everything else. He said it could unmake the men who made the boat. That's a direct quote. Unmake the men who made the boats. The line went quiet. Lionel had given me everything he had. The next morning, I called Gloria. We need to get back onto Obsidian before the marshal's inventory the hidden compartment. She filed an emergency motion for a targeted custodial inspection, citing the possibility of exonerating evidence. It took 4 days of legal combat, but a magistrate judge, the same one who'd later sanctioned Carrington, granted us 2 hours, supervised with a federal officer present. We entered the warehouse on a cold morning, the marshal's fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows on Obsidian's stripped interior. The master cabin safe had already been photographed and logged, but the false bottom drawer, the one we'd opened during the first inspection, had been rescrewed shut by the marshal's evidence team. They hadn't searched beneath it. They'd assumed it was empty. I knelt down, unscrewed the panel with a tool the marshal handed me, and lifted the floor plate. The compartment was empty. Except for one thing, tucked into a seam I'd missed the first time, a thin plastic sleeve yellowed with age. Inside, a single document handwritten in Spanish dated 1995. It was a sworn statement from the original owner, the cartel boss, declaring that Obsidian had been purchased with laundered funds and that the DEA seizure was legally valid. He'd written it from a Colombian prison weeks before his death. He'd hidden it on the boat to guarantee that if anyone ever tried to reclaim the yacht on his behalf, they'd be destroyed by his own confession. The document that Carrington had spent his entire career trying to suppress, the proof that his title claim was built on a foundation of lies, was a suicide note written by a dead narco. The marshal logged the document as evidence. Gloria added it to a motion for summary judgment, and against all odds, something else happened. The nephew in Medellin, the one Carrington had convinced to assert a claim, withdrew it. He'd been contacted by Isabella, who flew to Colombia and showed him the ledger, the confession, the full picture. He didn't want the boat. He wanted nothing to do with the cartel that had terrorized his family for decades. He issued a notarized statement renouncing all interest, calling Carrington's lawsuit a fraud perpetrated on my family's name. The tide had turned. The federal case collapsed. The judge dismissed it with prejudice and ordered Carrington to pay sanctions, but I wasn't finished. The ledger, the confession, the dismissed nephew, they were legal victories. But Carrington still had his fleet, his reputation, his marble office with a panoramic view of Palm Beach. I'd survived, I hadn't won. To win, I needed to make sure he could never do this to anyone else. And the key to that victory was still sitting in Gloria's office, the original 2001 entry from Delgado's ledger naming Derek Carrington as a bribe-offering attorney. That wasn't just embarrassing. In the state of Florida, offering a bribe to influence a public auction is a felony. Even if it happened 2 decades ago, the ledger was evidence. And when paired with the pattern of misconduct in my case, it was enough to trigger a broader investigation. I didn't leak it to the press. I didn't post it online. I walked it into the Florida Department of Law Enforcement myself with a detailed statement and let the system do what it was designed to do. The investigation took 8 months. During that time, I finished Obsidian's refit. The work crews showed up every day, and the yacht slowly transformed from a gutted skeleton into the vessel I'd always known she could be. I worked alongside the crew not because I had to, but because I needed to. Every sanded teak rail, every polished chrome fitting, every engine test was a reminder that I was still here, still fighting, still building. On the day of her relaunch, Isabella and Uncle Tommy stood on the dock as I cut a cheap bottle of champagne against the bow. Obsidian slipped into the water without a sound. She was beautiful, she was mine, and I was finally, after 2 years of legal warfare and sleepless nights, ready to turn her into the charter business I dreamed of from the beginning. But the investigation into Carrington, that was its own slow burn, and the day it finally ignited, I wasn't even there to see it. Isabella called me while I was doing a final walkthrough before our first charter. They arrested him, she said, at his office. The FDLE, federal agents, the whole show, it's on every news channel. I turned on the television in the salon. There he was, white hair disheveled, hands cuffed behind his back, being led out of the same building where he'd once sat in a leather chair and decided to destroy me. The The charges included conspiracy, bribery, evidence tampering, and a dozen counts of fraud tied to other vessels in his fleet. The empire he'd spent 40 years building had been hollowed out by the very thing he'd used as a weapon, the paper trail. He eventually pleaded guilty to reduced charges and served 18 months in federal custody. His fleet was liquidated, his marina was sold. His name, which had once opened every door in the yacht world, became a warning. I didn't celebrate, I didn't cheer, but I did allow myself one quiet moment standing on the flybridge of a boat that had nearly killed me, watching the news anchor list the charges and whispering, "Uncle Tommy was right." I still don't know if I was talking about the investment or something larger. But there's one last twist, something I didn't anticipate, and it came in the weeks after Carrington's arrest when I finally had time to sit down and really study the confession we'd found in the hidden compartment. The document was more than a legal exoneration. It was an apology written by a dying man to a daughter he'd never met, admitting his crimes, naming his associates, and detailing exactly how the dirty money had flowed. Among the names listed, the original marina manager at Bluewater, the one who'd signed the addendum. The cartel had paid him to keep the yacht in his marina and look the other way. When Delgado bought the boat, the payment stopped and the manager resented it. The conspiracy had layers I'm still peeling back. And somewhere in those layers, I found a single line that made me put the document down and stare at the wall for a very long time. The cartel boss had written, "If you find this, you're either my heir or my enemy. Either way, the truth is yours now, don't waste it." I'm not his heir and I was never his enemy, but I'm the one who found the truth and I'm not wasting it. I'm going to tell you something I've never said publicly. The day Carrington was arrested, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt exhausted. The kind of exhaustion that lives in your bones long after the adrenaline fades. I'd won, but I'd lost 2 years of my life to fear and litigation and the slow grind of being underestimated by men who couldn't imagine a deckhand beating them. I'd been called a fraud, a gold digger, a cartel puppet. I'd watched my investors flee and my name get dragged through every trade publication. I'd sat alone on an empty dock and genuinely considered giving up. And the only reason I didn't, the only reason I'm here telling you this story is because a dying maintenance supervisor picked up the phone, because a paralegal friend stayed up late reading contracts, because a daughter I'd never met trusted me enough to sign a napkin, because a man who ran a supply store in Jupiter wrote a check that could have ruined him. The loophole didn't save me, people saved me. Specific, stubborn, unlikely people, and I've tried to spend every day since earning what they gave me. That's the real story, not the yacht, not the fortune, the people. That day on the empty dock, I didn't know if I was brave or just too stubborn to quit. I was 25, broke, alone, and the only thing I'd ever built was being towed out of sight by people who had more of everything than I did. But standing there, I realized something I carry with me now. The moment you decide you're not the victim of your story anymore, everything shifts, not all at once, not with trumpets, but the direction changes. And once your direction changes, you start walking toward a different ending. The truth is, loopholes don't save people. Luck doesn't save people. What saves people is showing up when it's easier to hide, making calls when no one answers, and letting the right people in even when trusting someone feels like handing them a loaded weapon. Uncle Tommy handed me his retirement savings and never once asked when I'd pay it back. Isabella signed a napkin in a diner because she believed in fairness more than she feared risk. Lionel spoke up with weeks left to live because his conscience was louder than his fear. That's the architecture beneath every triumph you ever hear about. Not genius, not destiny, just stubborn, faithful people refusing to let a single human fight alone. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever found a crack in a system that wasn't built for you and decided to pry it open, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. It matters more than you know. And drop a comment. What would you have done when Carrington froze your assets and took the boat? Would you have fought or would you have walked away? I read the comments. I want to know. And if you want more stories about ordinary people who found extraordinary leverage, check the description for a video I think you'll love just as much as this one. Someone else who refused to play by the rules they were handed. Thank you for being here, for listening, for believing maybe that the game isn't over until you stop playing. I'm Michelle Vance and this was my story. See you next time.